planet Earth, a world of mystery and imagination, science and wonder, that is constantly being gazed upon and unraveled by the finest minds humanity has to offer. Welcome to the Univi Podcast, the show that presents a free-flowing conversation with those beings at the very center of the world of academia and research from all around the globe, with your host, Simon Holland.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Univi Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Holland. Today we are talking with Dr. Seth Shostak, the senior astronomer and director of the renowned SETI Research Institute. He started his academic life with a bachelor's in physics from Princeton and a PhD in astrophysics from Caltech. He's co-authored a college textbook in astrobiology. In addition to 4 published books, he's published nearly 300 popular articles and papers on astronomy, technology, film, and television. He's been elected Fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and is the chair of the International Academy of Astronautics SETI Permanent Study Group. Seth is notably the winner of the Klumpke-Roberts Award, awarded to the Astronomical Society of the Pacific in recognition for his outstanding contributions to the public understanding and appreciation of astronomy, and has worked tirelessly to promote the science of the stars. He can be included in the same conversation with names such as Sagan, Tyson, and Kaku, and is the host of the SETI's weekly science radio show, Big Picture Science, which can be found at seti.org. We had a few technical issues within this recording at the Univi studio, so we'd like to offer an apology to Dr. Shostak and of course his listeners for the less than stellar audio fidelity in this podcast. It's an excellent space pun right there. But seriously, I encourage our listeners to check Seth out on Big Picture Science for the full Shostak voice quality. The show itself is highly educational, engaging, and entertaining, as we hope this one is. And without further ado, we welcome Dr. Seth Shostak to the show. Seth, can you tell us a little bit about the SETI Institute to start?
Well, the SETI Institute is a nonprofit research organization here in the Silicon Valley of California, just south of San Francisco, about an hour. And we're interested in the question of life in space. So we have maybe 70, 75 PhD scientists, most of whom are astrobiologists, which is to say they're working on things like, is there life on Mars or the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, that sort of thing. And there's a small group here that does SETI. I'm part of that group. SETI being the Search for Exterrestrial Intelligence, smart aliens, the kinds that might be broadcasting radio signals our way.
How did you get into this? I mean, so just like any other human, you've grown up under the night sky. Was that one of the things that you looked at and you just thought, there's got to be something?
Well, I think so. I mean, I'm told by my parents that I was, as a young kid, actually afraid of the night sky. I thought the stars might fall on me. I don't worry about that quite as much now, but I was interested in astronomy at a young age. I built a telescope by age 10. That's not so terribly unusual. I used to go to the planetarium in New York when I would go visit my cousins and that sort of thing. So I was interested, at least from the age of 8, in astronomy. And in fact, I studied that in school. I was doing research on galaxies. But eventually, I realized that the instruments I was using to study galaxies could also be used to try and eavesdrop on ET, and that sounded like an interesting thing to do.
So you've published some papers. Number one is life in the universe. Why do you think it's important for humans to understand that might be life in the universe when we've got problems here on Earth? What's some of the arguments that you sort of get into it in your capacity there?
Yeah, well, we've always got problems on Earth. You could have said that at any point, and you could have said, there's no point in giving this money, for example, to this guy, Chris Columbus, or Ferdinand Magellan, or any of these explorers. I mean, why give them that money? Why did the British Admiralty give, Captain Jim Cook a cruddy ship and enough money to sail the South Pacific and, map the east coast of Australia and that sort of thing? I mean, they had problems at home. And indeed, they probably had more problems than we have today. Nevertheless, exploration always pays off. Eventually, it always pays off. And in terms of learning about other beings in the cosmos, well, what could be more interesting than that? I mean, just to know that you're not the only kid on the block. And if you find advanced aliens, and the only kind we can find are likely to be advanced, at least that's some sort of indication that we could survive our own culture, if you will, that we have a future. Because if they've had one, maybe we can have one too.
Would it be kind of catastrophic for the human race if we did discover aliens? I mean, the talk is that they'd be super advanced if they've managed to find us. And they'd probably look at us like when we stumble upon an ant.
Well, maybe that's having them discover us. It's hard to discover us, actually. They really only have a decent chance if they're closer than about 70 light years, because then they could pick up some of the radio, television, and mainly radar signals that we've been sending into space willy-nilly since the Second World War. But, picking up signals is a lot different than coming here. Interstellar travel is only easy on television. It's not actually easy. In fact, it's so difficult that, you really have to have a very, very good reason to spend all that money, because no matter how you do it, it's either very slow or it's enormously expensive. When I say enormous, I mean, use up all the energy that we've burned since the start of Homo sapiens for one rocket. I mean, it's really hard to do. So you can worry about them being nasty and, treating us no better than you treat the ants. But on the other hand, how often do you go in your backyard looking for ants and saying, I'm just going to pour lighter fluid down their holes and set them alight? You probably don't do that very often. And if you do, maybe you ought to get psychological help.
That's true, until the ants start to bite you, and then you've got to take evasive action. I think humanity might have that kind of quality.
Yes, exactly. We're not like the mozzies, that are always biting you and causing a real problem. We're not doing anything bad to the aliens. We're not doing anything to the aliens.
And humanity as a whole, when we sort of get together and we peer out and we put our minds to it, do you think we stand a better chance of finding extraterrestrial life? Or is that what SETI is all about? It's about uniting, I guess, hobbyists?
Well, not so much. There is a screensaver, a well-known piece of software called SETI at Home that's used by, I think something like 10 million people have downloaded that software. It's not our project. It's a project from a small group at the University of California at Berkeley, which is, just across the San Francisco Bay here. It's sort of like the difference between, I don't know, Sydney and Manly or something, but whatever. Those people have indeed made this software available, and millions of people have used it to help produce SETI data. But in general, what would help the search is not so much the citizen science, although that's good. It's just having enough money to pay some scientists to do it, to develop new equipment, to wield radio telescopes that are necessary, and just go out and look. That's what you really need, to have a project where people are actually doing the science.
And what's some of the roadblocks that you've encountered trying to get looking for that funding?
Well, it's hard because, at least in this country, the SETI experiments that are conducted here, not a single one of them is funded by tax dollars. None of it is government money. When I joined the SETI Institute 20 years ago, it was a NASA program, but that was killed by Congress it's more than 20 years ago, 1993. And since then, our SETI efforts here at the SETI Institute have all been run thanks to contributions by, individuals. Actually, people will send you $20 or something like that. And, that's a hard way to go, because it's hard to pay the salaries of more than, one or two or three people with that kind of an income stream. So what you really need is people who are, somewhat wealthier and who say that this is a good deal and give you some real money. A Russian investor by the name of Yuri Miller actually did that for the Berkeley guys and gave them a lot of money. So they have more money. They can do more things. Money does make a difference. The total number of people in the world doing this, maybe a dozen, maybe.
So we're calling this the Bernie Sanders funding model?
Well, I don't know whether Bernie is well aware of me, but I doubt it. I'm not, I don't know. Yes, maybe it is the Bernie Sanders funding model in the sense that it's all, made up of private donations and usually small donations. That's true. But another Bernie Sanders funding model might be to say that, well, maybe NASA ought to invest a little bit of money in this. That would, I think that was a good thing to have done. It never took more than 1/1000th of the NASA budget. So it wasn't a big impact on their budget. And by the way, the NASA budget is 1/1000th of the U.S. government's federal budget. So, space is a tiny thing, and SETI was a tiny thing in space. So, you could have some government money that would make a big difference. That's for sure.
Is it hard to watch things like the horse race between Republicans and Democrats when you're looking outside of the universe, outside of the galaxy? Is it hard to look at these sort of terrestrial squabbles and...
Well, I don't think so. I mean, no more difficult for me than for anybody else. I mean, if I were just, an air conditioner repair, or I changed the transmission oil in cars or something like that, I might look at the politics going on in this country, with befuddlement perhaps, or amusement, or maybe horror, but whatever. I don't think that's any different for a scientist. Just because you deal with very big, very old things, people seem to think that you have a different attitude about, daily life. And in some sense you do, because you recognize that it's a very tiny thing in a very big arena. But it doesn't mean that, you're not interested in learning the latest about what Donald Trump has said today to, offend anyone, that sort of thing.
Yep. Is it hard? Have you modeled what the like sort of roadmaps for what a society, an extraterrestrial society might look like, how it might operate?
No, of course, nobody knows what that would be. That would be like, trilobites trying to model what the residents of Australia would be like, 300 million years later.
I would know that.
And it's just, there's no real way to do that. But what we normally assume, and it's a very conservative assumption, is that if they're biological beings, the way we are, then they're going to have the ability to live on, they'll have to live, put it that way, on a planet that can support biology. So that means some sort of liquid on the surface and an atmosphere and a few other things. So we usually assume that the chances of finding ET are greatest if we point our antennas in the direction of stars that are likely to have planets sort of like the Earth. But on the other hand, that itself might actually not be a very good assumption because, what's happening in this this century to us, we're inventing artificial intelligence. And a lot of people say, oh, we'll never build a machine that can do a white collar job as well as a human. But that probably will seem like a very naive statement by the end of this century. So if we're inventing artificial intelligence, they've already done that, the advanced ones. And so maybe most of the intelligence in the cosmos is synthetic and doesn't need to be on a planet at all.
Yeah, there's no reason it needs to obey Earth rules, does it? Doesn't need
Nope.
oxygen, doesn't need lungs, doesn't need any of that kind of stuff.
Nope, doesn't need any of that. It needs energy and needs a little bit of matter to build parts, but you can find those in great abundance in places that are quite different from the Earth.
I've had a bit of a question on my mind since I was a little kid, and it was about sort of fourth dimensional beings. So we're bound with our three dimensions. The dimension of time is linear for us. Is there chances of multiple dimensional beings? What sort of rules would they abide by? How would that work for them?
Well, we don't have the physics for that, so we can't say about rules. I mean, and one should never say never. So I'm always reticent about saying that's just impossible. But on the other hand, at least life, and of course, intelligent life. Intelligent life is just based on chemistry. And chemistry, is done, if you will, with atoms and molecules that we know about. I mean, it's in the usual kind of world that we do know about. Now, could there be, interactions in the 11 dimensions of string theory, if that really is true, and that kind of thing? Well, I mean, we don't know. We have no idea. It doesn't seem terribly probable to me, but I mean, one can't rule things out. But, those sorts of discussions are somewhat like my saying, there's probably a party going on in this room here in the 9th, 10th, and 11th dimensions. But since I have no way to get into those dimensions, I really can't enjoy the party.
So just previous to your arrival, there was some really big moments, wasn't there? You've had a couple of wow signals and some Martian bacteria. Tell us a little bit about those and the legacy that you came into.
Well, that wasn't done at the SETI Institute. The WOW signal was found, I think, in 1977 at Ohio State University. They had an antenna there that had been used for astronomy, but it became outdated. So they were using it in a SETI experiment where they just left it on 24 hours a day. And the Earth, of course, rotates every 24 hours, more or less. And so the sky, just passed across the top of the telescope. And so, they would just measure as much of the sky as they could looking for signals. And they found one in 1977. In fact, the astronomer on duty, Jerry Amon, just walked in and looked at the computer printout, because in those days, computers output it onto paper, and saw this big signal, and he wrote "wow" next to it. Wow. And so it became famous. I think it largely became famous because of the nomenclature. I mean, wow, that gets everybody's attention. Because there were many other signals that were found in those days that were similarly mysterious. The thing about the wow signal is it really looked like an extraterrestrial signal, just a beep, if you will, just a whistle. But it was not seen again a minute later, and it has never been seen since. So we don't know what it was. It probably was just interference here on Earth.
Have you had any big moments in the last couple of years? Any big developments?
Well, there are always developments. I mean, there are developments in astronomy, finding out what fraction of stars might have planets sort of like the Earth. We didn't know that. Even 5 years ago, we didn't know much about that. Today, we do know some of that. We know that maybe 1 in 5 stars has a planet that could support life. That's news, and that's interesting. In terms of SETI itself, what's changed is mostly the instrumentation. How we have, the ability now to sample much more of the radio dial at once than we were able to do even a few years ago. So that speeds up the search. And that's why I remain quite optimistic about SETI. I mean, if this idea makes any sense, if trying to eavesdrop on ET has legs, if that's a good idea, then I think it will succeed in the next 2 decades because of the improvement in technology.
Has SETI stumbled upon anything that might help humanity out if things were to go bad?